actually, let's talk about Frankfurt because the next opponent.
Yeah, I'm sick of going on about it. I mean, we make the same rant about Dortmund every 3 months. We've got nothing else to say.
Yeah, no, Frankfurt is of course the next opponent. They beat Freiburg 4-1. It looks like Omar Marmoush has played his last game. He scored in that game against Freiburg. It sounds increasingly that Man City have reached an agreement with Eintracht Frankfurt. Surprise, surprise, Stefan. Eintracht Frankfurt asked for 80 million euros. How much is Man City paying?
Exactly what Frankfurt want.
Exactly what Frankfurt wanted. People should just stop. Honestly, Frankfurt tell you that they want this amount of money for a player. Just either take it or leave it. This is now the second Middle East run club that has learned this the hard way. So yeah, Omar Marmoush off for 80 million euros to Man City. That is a loss without a doubt. And Frankfurt, they will take the money happily. They will reinvest it. Maybe this winter, maybe next summer. They didn't replace Kolumuani right away either, right? They waited, I think, half a season, and then they brought in Hugo Ekitike, and people wondering who the Omar Marmoush replacement is. I actually think it is going to be Hugo Ekitike, to be honest with you. They're just going to give him a bit of a bigger role. They also have Chan Ozun, who's a bit more of a number 10 and rather than a number 9, but has really had really good scoring numbers in the second division last year, right, for Nuremberg. And he can play that role of Hugo Ekitike. So, I do think that they are still a very good team, regardless of Omar Marmoush leaving. They are, as you said, far ahead in the Bundesliga standings of Borussia Dortmund. Dortmund are 10th, Frankfurt are 3rd. There's an 8-point gap between those two teams. I think that 8-point gap really nicely symbolizes the difference between those two clubs and where they are currently. Frankfurt have been slowly but surely building their way up to a top 4 side in German football. Not sure if they're going to get there with Marmoush gone, although I'm still pretty optimistic, to be quite frank with you, that they can still do it regardless. It's just such a well-run club, and they're so very good at identifying talent, advancing that talent, selling that talent for a lot of money. There's a ton of interesting stuff going off the field as well, right? They get the NFL games that make them quite a lot of money. They have that 99-year lease on the stadium, which guarantees them a significant income. So, this is it feels like a game between one giant on the descent and one giant on the ascent. And for Dortmund, this is a pretty dangerous situation now because they lose this game. And we're not even talking Conference League qualification here. We're talking, seriously that the European qualification is completely questioned here. Champions League out of reach. There is a gap now to Mainz. We're in 6th. I mean, this could be one of those moments where for the rest of the season, Dortmund are not looking for not qualifying for Europe, and that has all sorts of implications for the future. You just need to look at Werder or Schalke or Hamburg SV to see what happens when a big club like Dortmund doesn't make European football. And so this is a game with a lot of implications.
Yeah, without a doubt. We were kind of joking before we came on air that Manchester City seem to continually do favours for Dortmund, usually in the transfer window where they just kind of send them these kind of young players who are obviously going to become stars. Jadon Sancho, the most obvious one. But in this case, they're doing them a favour by signing the star players for their very next opponents. So we'll see if it goes through between now and I guess what will be tomorrow night. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think Frankfurt, I think there obviously will be. It's a huge loss in the short term. There's just no two way about it. Obviously, Omar Marmoush has been outstanding for Frankfurt. Whether he's the player that Man City think they're signing, I think it's a serious question. It's one we actually talked about in one of the bonus shows this week as to like his actual long term success as a player, or whether they're just signing him off the back of a notable purple patch of form. But that's Manchester City's problem going forward, I guess, rather than Frankfurt's. I think Frankfurt will be delighted with the fact that they're getting what they're getting for him. And as you said, they do have kind of backups who can step up there. You're absolutely right. Hugo Ekitike has not only kind of been a good strike partner with Marmoush, but when Marmoush has missed out in games, he's really stepped into that role as the talisman. I'm also really interested in seeing how Igor Matanovic does, the young Croatian striker they've picked up. I think he's 21. Sorry, not picked up. He's came through the youth ranks, actually. He was really good in the Zweite Bundesliga for Karlsruhe last year. Bunch of goals and assists. He's already playing for the Croatian national team. He hasn't really got a shot at it yet this season, as you would expect, because he's got Marmoush and Ekitike in front of him. But when he has played, he's looked quite well. I think the only start he's made in the Bundesliga this season, he actually got a goal in. So, they might already have a ready-made replacement in him on the pitch. They might have to bring in another striker because I think that then leaves them with just two players for two positions. So we might see them, pick up a player on loan or maybe a young player that they've already got their eyes on. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. I'm really intrigued to see how this game goes because there's a few things that's worth bearing in mind here. The first one is that Frankfurt have a really good home record so far this season. They've only lost one game in front of their own fans, which is against Mainz. And Mainz are the away specialist. Mario wrote a great newsletter on them this week, actually, talking about why they're doing so well. And, the backbone of their impressive season has been their very kind of militant, organised, counter-attacking football on the road where they just pick up points off very good teams. I think you said in your article they've beaten Dortmund, Bayern and Frankfurt, if I'm not, maybe Leverkusen too.
No, so Leverkusen was the only top team that beat Mainz.
So of course it was this week, of course, wasn't it? So the point I'm making is that there's no real shame in losing at home to Mainz this season. But the other interesting thing that's worth bearing in mind is it feels like a million years ago that at the start of the season, Dortmund played Frankfurt at home and it was a relatively straightforward win for them. So it'll be interesting to see if Frankfurt have some degree of, replacing that or avenging that result. And you'd hope they do put a much better performance. But the other thing as well, which is really intriguing, is that Dortmund, after the Kiel game, didn't go back to Dortmund. They just travelled straight to Frankfurt. And they've actually been staying, if I'm not mistaken, Manu, at the DFB's kind of big training ground there. So I was reading the reports about this and I was kind of thinking it's almost like some sort of Hollywood movie where the head coach kind of brings everyone in, and it reminds me of Remember the Titans, I think it was, when Denzel Washington's character takes them all to, I think it's Gettysburg he takes them all to, and then they all go for a jog and he's standing on the pitch and he's talking about, how they all have to stand together like the soldiers did that day or they'll all fall apart. Very dramatic, obviously. And I'm not really trying to compare Dortmund's mishandled season to a really good movie about racism and things in American sport, but it reminded me a wee bit of that, where Nuri Sahin has got them like on this kind of mid-season training camp in Frankfurt, and he's like, "It's now or never, boys." So we need to see how Dortmund react to this. They might react well. They might manage to get a point off Frankfurt, and if Frankfurt are missing Marmoush, then it might swing in Dortmund's favour. But I still think Frankfurt are a great team without Marmoush. As we said, they've got firepower up front who can replace him. And if they win this game, and if they win it comfortably, you have to seriously question how much time Nuri Sahin has left.
Yeah, no, that's a big one, right? A defeat there, and the situation is so dire. You really have to wonder how that's going to continue. I am also so very intrigued how Frankfurt are going to do, what Frankfurt are going to do with all this money, and who they're going to bring in, and of course that's going to be a story for next week's transfer show. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes.